Welcome to Secrets of History, a series of lectures exploring the conspiratorial view of history. It is the contention of historian Ralph Epperson that wars, revolutions, and depressions are planned years in advance, and that those who have been involved in the planning of these events have been ensuring that their involvement has been removed from recorded history. It will be Ralph Epperson's purpose to discuss the major events of the past and to remove the veil that has been utilized to cover up the secrets of history.
Secrets of History is a 24-week lecture series which will explore the conspiratorial view of history. I've been studying the historical view that holds that the major events of the past have been caused intentionally. About 2 years ago, I published this book entitled The Unseen Hand, and I've subtitled it An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. I wrote this book in 1985, and it's still being sold even today. But we're going to review much of the material from this book in this series, but we'll still be covering many of the things in addition to that. Tonight's session is number 10 in the series, and tonight we're going to start a new study, or change the subject a little bit, to a study of American history. And we're going to start to see how the bankers have been involved, in American history, and we've not been told that. So we're going to start that tonight by starting our study in American history in 1776, and we're going to continue right through the stock market crash of 1929. We obviously won't get all that covered tonight, but that'll be the subject for the next couple of weeks. To understand this period of history, we must understand the central banking system, and I'd like to start with some thoughts on banks and banking. First, I'd like to introduce you to Reginald McKenna, the English Chancellor of the Exchequer from 1915 to 1916. And he was also chairman of the board of the Midland Bank. I believe that's an English bank, I'm not sure. But anyway, Mr. McKenna said this in January 1924, number 1, I am afraid the ordinary citizen will not like to be told that the banks can and do create money. And they who control the credit of the nation, direct the policies of governments, and hold in the hollow of their hands the destiny of the people. Another English banker, Sir Josiah Stamp, President of the Bank of England, said this, number 2, if you want to remain the slaves of the bankers and pay the costs of your own slavery, let them continue to create money and control the nation's credit. American President James Garfield said this about this money power, these money lenders. Number 3, whoever controls the volume of money is absolute master of all industry and commerce. By the way, as a sidelight, what happened to President Garfield? You might recall that he was assassinated. And it would be an interesting research project for someone to find out if there was a connection between this comment about who controls the volume of money and his assassination. I don't know. And of course, it'd probably be difficult to find out. Historian Will Durant, in his book Story of Civilization, says this, number 4, the men who can manage money manage all. Isn't that interesting? What is the goal of those who manage money? One who answered this question was Dr. Carroll Quigley, professor of history at Georgetown University. Dr. Quigley formerly taught at Princeton and Harvard. Dr. Quigley wrote this rather large book entitled Tragedy and Hope. As you can see, it's 1,300 pages long. It's rather thick. And Dr. Quigley claims that he has studied this conspiracy for 20 years and that he was actually made privy to its papers for 2 years of his life. In other words, Dr. Quigley has written a 1,300-page book to prove that a conspiracy actually exists. He wrote this, number 5, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret, notice, secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The reason these bankers want central banks is because central banks, create money out of nothing, loan it to the government at interest. In other words, governments borrow money from central banks. One who warned us about this debt accumulation was Thomas Jefferson. Here's what he wrote, number 6. It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes, a principle which, if acted on, would save 1/2 the wars of the world. Now, I'll explain how debt causes wars in a few moments, but we'll come back to that quote, by the way, as well. That's a fascinating statement by one who knew, Thomas Jefferson. Others have warned us about banks and banking systems, and one who did that was Jesus in the New Testament of the Bible. The Bible says in Matthew 21:12, number 7, and Jesus went into the temple of God and overthrew the tables of the money changers. Now, as far as I know, this is the only instance of the use of violence by Jesus. Less than 1 week later, Jesus was on the cross. And I believe that this act of overthrowing the tables of the money changers in the temple triggered those money changers to act, and I believe it was them who killed Jesus Christ. How does the system of central banking work? I'd like to answer by briefly discussing how a local banker works, and then we can transfer that knowledge to how an international banker works. Let's presume that you want to buy a car, so you go, since you probably most often don't have enough money to buy it yourself, you go to a local bank, and there the bank asks you to sign a note promising to pay the bank the money back in monthly installments, principal plus interest. The bank retains the legal ownership of the car, and you become only the registered owner. In other words, the bank still owns the car, and you're agreeing to pay it back and drive it with their permission. Now, if you don't pay for your car, don't make your monthly payments, the bank has the ability and the right under the contract to repossess the car. You don't pay, you don't drive. They repossess it. The car becomes the collateral for the loan, obviously. In other words, if they didn't do that, you'd take the car and skip. So by contract, they retain the legal ownership of that, and they have the right to repossess it. Now, let's presume that you're a king and you need to borrow money for your kingdom. Where do you go to borrow money? The local bank doesn't have enough money, so you go to your nation's central bank, if you have one. By the way, if a central bank loans to many nations, it's called an international bank. So what becomes the collateral for the loan? If you're a government and you borrow money, what becomes the collateral? You don't have a car, you didn't buy a car, you borrowed money on your government. What does the banker repossess if you don't pay? Does he repossess the crown? How about the palace? Maybe the queen, maybe you'd sign her away, I don't know. But there is nothing for the banker to repossess. He doesn't want the kingdom, he wants his money back. Now, as the king, you have a tool that you don't have as a public citizen. You can repudiate the debt. Repudiation is defined by the dictionary as number 8. Repudiation, the refusal of a national government to pay monetary obligations. In other words, the banker does not have to pay the loan. He can repudiate it. And every banker knows that. Let me give you an example. What's going to happen? What would happen? Let's just presume that the banker shows up for his first installment payment. He says, Mr. King, I loaned you money. It's time for the first installment. We signed a contract, and I'm here for my first installment. And the banker says, the king says, rather, I'm not going to pay you. You don't seem to understand, King. We signed a note. I've got it right here. You signed it, and I loaned you the money. I want you to pay. I'm not going to pay. I'm the king. He says, if I go like this and snap my finger, guards come in and haul you away. And you'll walk out of here with your head in your hands. In other words, I'm the king, you're the banker, I'm the more powerful, don't object, I'm not paying it, I'm repudiating the debt. The banker soon learns that he better not do that, and he leaves. But there are ways for the banker to get paid back for his loan. The secret is you loan to 2 governments at the same time. Now, this is the secret. I want to go to the blackboard to illustrate this so that you can understand how this process works. Let's go here to King A. We're going to call this King Alpha, just for the sake of keeping it simple, King A for Alpha, and then we're going to have King B here, King Bravo. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, you're King Alpha in our little discussion. Let's say that you're, without borrowing any money, you're able to loan enough. You don't loan money, but through some taxes, you raise a 1,000-man army, let's say, to defend your nation. But you've not borrowed any money. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, King Bravo also has a 1,000-man army. In other words, neither one's more powerful than the other, and this, by the way, keeps the two from fighting. Neither one of them is more powerful than the other. So let's say that you arrange to borrow money from the bankers, and let's just say you loan $1 million, or you borrow $1 million from the bankers. And with that, you decide to create a 10,000-man army instead of a 1,000-man army. You're now a threat to King Bravo, aren't you? As long as you do that, then you become the more powerful nation. Now let's take the next step. Let's say that you, as the banker, comes in and to you and says, I want my first payment. And you say, I'm not giving it to you. Why? Well, I'm going to repudiate the debt. You say, well, I'm sorry, we got a note. And you say, well, I'm not going to pay it. And the banker leaves. Now what does he do? He goes over to King Bravo here and says, how would you like to borrow $10 million so you can raise a 100,000-man army and collect my debt for me? What do you mean? I want you to move into the territory known as King Alpha here and get my money back for me. Now, let's just say before you do that, you go over to King Alpha and say, King Alpha, by the way, if you don't make your payment, my friend King Bravo, who's now got a 100,000-man army, is going to attack and take away or repossess your kingdom. You'd better make your payments. King Alpha says, I will pay my money back, or loan me more. And you say, nope, not until you pay me back what you owe me already. Now you've got a problem, though. When you do that, suddenly King Bravo says, when you go to get your first installment, I'm not going to pay. So you say, King Bravo, my friend King Alpha over here has got an army of 10,000 men. He's going to attack to get your kingdom. King Alpha says, send him tomorrow morning. The war will be over by noon. See, now Bravo is no threat to, Alpha is no threat to Bravo. So Bravo now says, I'm not going to pay. You've got to arrange it so both are as powerful as each other. So you loan this guy $10 million so he can raise actually an army equal to or even surpass that of this man. But if you make this man too powerful, then this one doesn't pay. If you make him too powerful, this one doesn't pay. This is the secret of international banking. You've got to have what they call balance of power politics. You keep both in power, both strong enough with the threat of paying the other or loaning the other one more money so that he repossesses your kingdom. And with that, kings soon learn they'd better pay their debts. It's called balance of power politics. It's been working throughout history for centuries. In fact, number 9, I'll show it to you in writing. It's called balance of power politics. Both kings have to be threats to the other. If one is too large to the other, the large won't pay, but the small will. Now I ask you, what has been the history of Europe for hundreds of years? Alpha fights Bravo. Bravo fights Alpha. Alpha and Bravo join together to fight Charlie. Alpha and Charlie fight Bravo ad infinitum. Why? All of these wars have been fought to get the money back for the bankers who finance the wars. In other words, it's a debt collection process. Wars are intended to repossess the kingdom, to make the king pay. It's the only reason Europe has had wars, I believe, for centuries. Let me repeat that quote from Thomas Jefferson, number 10. It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes, a principle which, if acted on, would save 1/2 of the wars of the world. In other words, don't borrow money. And if you don't borrow money, you won't have wars. There are others who said that in the past. I want to introduce you to Major General Smedley Butler. This is an American Marine general who was a general in the Marine Corps between the 20s and 30s. Major General Butler wrote this, number 11. Here's a man who knows. He was an American general. He said war was largely a matter of money. Bankers lend money to foreign countries, and when they cannot repay, the president sends Marines to get it. I know. I've been in 11 of these expeditions. In other words, the major says, I'm in the debt collection business. My purpose is not to defend the country, it's to collect money, to repossess kingdoms. And Major General Butler went all over Latin America collecting debt, and even went to China for the United States government, according to him, to his own testimony. We're going to see Major General Smedley Butler again in 1932 in a very interesting and yet revealing story, one that I believe is true. We'll see him, so please remember that face and that man. We'll see him again. Now I ask you this question. Who is America in a balance of power politics game with today? Who are we using to collect the debt? Russia. I'm going to show you later that our government actually created its own enemy, communist Russia. Our government has created Russia as a debt collector. It is collecting the debt today in a balance of power politics. Our own government has created our own enemy, and we've been paying for that for over 70 years. Now, with that understanding of how wars are financed and fought and why they're fought, let's now take a look at some American history. Let's understand, by the way, since I didn't define it here, let me just briefly remind you from an earlier session what inflation is all about. Inflation is defined as an increase in the money supply causing prices to go up. Deflation is called a decrease in the money supply causing prices to drop. So with the control of the money supply, you can make business cycles up and down. That's what this thing's all about. The international bankers like wars, like messes, because they're the ones that loan them the money. It creates debt. Now let's start our study of American history. A power that man has that God doesn't have. This is very interesting, I thought. Just a one-liner, but I thought it was very interesting. Number 12, God cannot alter the past, only historians can. Think about that for a minute. We're going to see how historians have changed history to cover up the truth from you, the American citizen. We're going to examine American history to show how our history has been altered by those who benefit. American history since 1776 has been a continuous battle between those who want hard money, meaning gold and silver, and those who want printing press money, meaning paper money. I'm going to show in the next few minutes that the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Civil War are all connected. The American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Civil War of 1861 to 65 are all connected. All were caused by bankers to force America into creating a central bank to loan money to the government at interest. In addition, these bankers had to get America off the gold standard, meaning gold as the backing for our money. The bankers got their central bank, as we covered last week, in 1913, and we got off the gold standard 20 years later in 1933. One of the ways they achieved their goal was through secret societies. Arthur Edward Waite, one of the leading researchers into secret societies, wrote this, number 13. Beneath the broad tide of human history, there flow the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies which frequently determine in the depths the changes that take place upon the surface. Now, why secret societies? Because secret societies can meet in private. They take oaths that require them to keep those secrets intact or private, and no outsiders would be allowed in. And because they can do that, we can't find out what they're up to. We have to do some research and develop the information, as I've tried to do, to show you how secret societies have been involved in America's history for over 200 years. Now, let's study that. Let's see how our American history has been covered, or been changed, altered. And let's start our study with the American Revolution of 1776. Now, we've been told by the accidental school of history, those who say that things happen by accident, no one really knows why wars and revolutions start. We've been told by those who write that view that the major cause of the American Revolution was taxation without representation. But in truth, British taxes at the time were less than 1% of the annual gross national product. Less than 1%. And that because they weren't getting representation. For 1% tax, we've been told that was the major reason for the revolution. It was not, as we're going to see. Today, America's being taxed about 50% with representation, and we're not revolting. So something else caused our revolution. I'm going to ask the question and hopefully try to answer it. Is there another reason for the revolution? I believe there is. We're going to start our study of American history by examining a secret society which has been involved in America's history for over 200 years, yet few know about it. Number 14. One author has written this: Freemasonry is of vital importance to any political history of the founding of the United States, but most history books don't even mention it. Now the Masons today, and they were 200 years ago, were a secret society, and by the way, none of what I'm going to discuss tonight is secret, because, and by the way, I also want to share with you that I'm not and never have been a member of the Masons, but the Masons do publish books, pamphlets, and magazines, as we're going to see. And if you know what to look for and do your research, you can find a wealth of information about the Masons and what's happening inside their secret meetings. Now they call themselves Free and Accepted Masons, or simply Freemasons, or even more simply Masons by itself. And I'm going to refer to them probably as all three in the course of this next couple of weeks. The Masons originally, back in the early 1300s, I believe it was, built the magnificently beautiful Gothic churches of the Middle Ages with their spires, vaults, and stone arches. As I said, the original Masons were stone workers who worked in stone. Their traditional date of founding of the modern Masons is 1140 AD in Paris, France. But the more modern date, the one that I'm more concerned about, is their founding on June the 24th, 1717, when 4 Masonic lodges in London united to form the Grand Lodge of London. Now this is a book entitled The Revolution in Freemasonry, and I had to Xerox the book because I couldn't find it in a used bookstore, but there it is. It's written by Bernard Fay. It's called Revolution and Freemasonry, 1680 to 1800. Bernard Fay has written several books about this, about the Masons and how they've been involved in America's past in a revolutionary way. The book was written in 1935. Mr. Fay wrote in this book that instead of being a guild, meaning a guild of just workers who worked in stone, it became a church. And we're going to study in the next hour, probably even in the next hour, just who they worship in that church. Now, I want to go to the blackboard and briefly describe how today's Masons join and how they form their Masonic Lodge. So let me erase what we got on the board, and I'm going to try to illustrate to you a little bit about what the Masons, or how they operate, and this thing about the degrees. I'd like to start with the first thing that you join when you join the Masons. It's called the Blue Lodge. And there are 3 degrees. Now this thing about degrees is a matter, you work your way through the first degree, second, and third. There's a series of initiations into each one. But then at the end of that, after you become a Blue Lodge member, you have a choice. You can either go to what they call the York Rite, Y-O-R-K, or you can go to the Scottish Rite of the Freemasons. Now I'm not sure, because I don't really know much about the York Rite, and I don't believe they're really involved, as we're going to see the Scottish Rite is in America's history. So I don't know much about the York, but they either have 9, 12, or a total of 13 degrees. I'm not sure, and it's really not important. So we can, for all practical purposes, can dismiss the York Rite for their involvement in America's history. But the Scottish Rite we do have to discuss and study, and I'm going to try to discuss that now. The Scottish Rite has a total of 29 degrees. So you add the 29 here to the 3 there, you have a total of 32 degrees. So a Mason inside the Scottish Rite who's worked all his way through the degrees will have a total of 32, barring one last step, which I'll cover in a minute. There are really 33. But when you get through the Scottish Rite, you're a 32nd degree Mason. And perhaps many of you who are watching know a 32nd degree Mason. That's what he means. He's gone through the Blue Lodge for 3, and then more inside the Scottish Rite for a total of 29 more. Now there is a 33rd degree that both the York Rite and the Scottish Rite can join. When you get the top degrees of either the York Rite or become a 32nd degree Mason, you can be invited into the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite. Now, the 33rd degree is honorary. You can't earn that. These degrees are earnable. You sit down and learn and go through the process. But this degree is not earned. It's honorary. Only certain people are invited to that degree. There's one more auxiliary group called the Shriners. And that's also an honorary degree, although I guess you can be invited, and I don't think you can walk in and request it. I think they have to invite you in, but I think that's an honorary degree. And you've seen them around in parades and in public wearing their little fezzes, and quite often they appear in parades or in public. They also build burn hospitals for children and do a great deal of good work for the young children. So as far as I know, the Shriners aren't involved in what we're going to say, what we're going to cover. They also arrange a football game each year called the East-West football game and do a great deal for young people. Now here's the important thing that we've got to understand about the Masons. The average Mason today does not know that there is a secret organization inside the Masonic order that even he doesn't know about, and I'm going to prove that in a few minutes. The average Mason is intentionally misled by the other Masons. I'll prove that, as I say, in a few minutes. I'd like to introduce you to Albert Pike. I doubt whether you've ever heard of this man. He's not very well known in America, but he was extremely important, as we're going to see in our study of this conspiracy. Albert Pike was a 33rd degree Mason. He was also the sovereign grand commander of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry from 1859 to 1891. In other words, he was the top Mason in the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite. The one thing I didn't mention was that there are two branches of the Scottish Rite. One's called the northern jurisdiction and one's called the southern, I guess. This gentleman was head of the southern jurisdiction. Albert Pike wrote this book in 1871. I'm sorry I got a rubber band around it because the book's falling apart. This is an old edition of that book. It's simply called Morals and Dogma. There it is underneath the plastic to protect it. Morals and Dogma, written by Albert Pike in 1871. We're now going to read the entire title page of this book because I want you to see just what the book was intended to do and who wrote it. Here's the title: Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, prepared for the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree for the southern jurisdiction of the United States and published by its authority. In other words, the book was written for the Masons by the 33rd degree Council of the southern jurisdiction and written by its authority. Notice it was also written to tell them what the morals of the Scottish Rite were, and we're going to see just what those morals are a little later when we read parts of Albert Pike's book. This book is given to all Scottish Rite Masons of the southern jurisdiction. By the way, I confirmed that myself personally when I went to Tucson's Scottish Rite Cathedral and visited there. As I said, I'm not a member, but they freely told me that the book is given to members. I got my copy at a used bookstore, although the book is not intended, even in the cover it says, for the world at large. So I invite you, as we're going to read a little bit more about the book in a few minutes, and I invite you to get a copy for your own purposes. Here's what Pike wrote, number 15. The blue degrees, as I said, these are the first three of the 32, are but the outer court of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally, the initiate is intentionally misled by false interpretations. In other words, the Masons are going to lie to him. They're not going to tell him the truth. It is not intended that he shall imagine he understands them. Their true explication is reserved for the adepts, the princes of Masonry. By the way, you can read that yourself in Albert Pike's book if you're a Mason and have never read that. There are some Masons who are concealing things from you inside the Masonic Lodge. We're going to see what they are concealing in a few minutes. Now this is Manly P. Hall, who is another 33rd degree Mason, and he said the same thing in this little book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, written by Manly P. Hall, a 33rd degree Mason. And here's what he said, amongst other things, in this little pretty hardbound. By the way, I want to show you that this book is an approved Masonic book. This is a copy of a page out of the Royal Arch Mason magazine. It's an official magazine of the Masonic Lodge, and it contains a list of, quote, the best Masonic books available, unquote. Near the bottom of the list, you'll find the book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. So in other words, some Masons want the Masons to read this book. Now, what do they want their fellow Masons to know? Let's find out by reading a part of that book. Here's what Mr. Hall wrote in the book, officially approved for those who want to read about the Masonic Lodge inside the lodge. Number 16. The initiated brother realizes that few Masons of today know or appreciate the mystic meaning concealed within these rituals. In other words, the official Masonic teaching is that there are two Masons, the average Mason and the Mason who knows the real secrets. And we're going to see what those real secrets are in a few minutes. Now, this book is entitled Lectures on Ancient Philosophy, also written by Manly P. Hall, and it says it's a companion to the secret teachings of all ages. We're going to hold that book up a little later, probably not tonight, but in the next week we're going to examine what Manly P. Hall said in that book. In that book, Mr. Hall amplified his comments on the existence of these two classes of the Masons. Here's what he said, number 17. Freemasonry is a fraternity within a fraternity, an outer organization concealing an inner brotherhood of the elect. It is necessary to establish the existence of these two separate yet interdependent orders, the one visible and the other invisible. The visible society is a splendid camaraderie of free and accepted men, enjoined to devote themselves to ethical, educational, fraternal, patriotic, and humanitarian concerns. The invisible society is a secret fraternity. In other words, there are two groups inside the Masonic Lodge, what he calls the visible and the invisible, and they're up to different things, as we're going to see. Bernard Fay, as I said in that book, Revolution Freemasonry, I just held up a minute ago, wrote this, number 18. The inherent philosophy of Freemasonry implied a belief that mystic thought and feeling were bound to disappear and to be replaced by a strictly logical and rational era. Now, we're going to see what they consider this rational and logical era to be in a few minutes. The Masons print a magazine called New Age. And in a New Age magazine, a Mason by the name of Harold J. Bolin said this, number 19. Freemasonry believes it is more holy to live by reason than to live by faith, for reason is a bridge of understanding, while faith is only a bridge of hope. Reason challenges our minds. Now, here we have the thought that reason is desirable over faith. Let's continue the examination of that thought by examining a series of quotes written by Albert Pike in his book, Morals and Dogma. Now, we're going to take these one after the other. They're very, very revealing about what Pike wrote about reason. Number 20, in Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike wrote, Freemasonry is the conquest of the appetites and passions by the moral sense and the reason. Pike also wrote, number 21, human reason leaps into the throne of God and waves her torch over the ruins of the universe. And number 22, mind is the universal element, the one God. Wait a minute. He's saying mind is the one God. Number 23, reason is the absolute, for it is in it we must believe. Number 24, a Mason should assume the modest title of a lover of wisdom. Now, what is wrong with reason, the use of reason? I'm not opposed to the use of the mind, obviously, because I believe in free choice. I am opposed to the way that these people reason. They call it reason. I call it gibberish, as we're going to see, madness almost. Now, let's see how their minds reason, and then we're going to continue seeing that in the next few weeks. Now let's start our discussion about the role of the Masons in early American history. I want to go back to 1731 and note that the first lodge in Philadelphia in America was formed by the Masonic Lodge. It was the first Masonic Lodge in Philadelphia. In 1733, the second major lodge was formed in America in Boston. So here we have the two major lodges in Boston and Philadelphia at the very beginning of prior to the beginning of our revolution. In 1732, Ben Franklin, one of our founding fathers, joined the lodge in Philadelphia, and in 1734 he became the Grand Master, which is that's the number one man, like the president, inside the lodge. In 1777, the Grand Lodge of Virginia was formed, and by 1800 there were 11 Grand Lodges in the United States with a membership of around 16,000. Many of America's founding fathers were Masons, such people as number 25, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall, and James Madison, later President of the United States. All of these men were members of the Masonic Lodge. All 13 governors were Masons at the time of Washington's inaugurations. Number 26, since that time, 14 presidents, 18 vice presidents, 5 chief justices of the U.S. Supreme Court have been members of the Masonic Lodge. In the 97th Congress a few years ago, 28 senators and 78 congressmen were Masons. Now, I think it's very important that we distinguish between those who understand what's happening in the Masonic Lodge and those who don't. So please understand that all Masons today are not illuminated Masons, those who understand what's really happening inside the Masonic Lodge. But conversely, some of them are. And we must try and separate those who are aware of who Masonry really worships, what the true secrets are, from those who don't know, those who aren't. This is the square and the compass, and they're two Masonic symbols, and perhaps you've seen them on the backs of American cars of members of the Masonic Lodge. The square and the compass are their symbols, and they show up in some very strange places. When the city of Washington, D.C. was laid out, by the way, as we pointed out last week, it's constitutional to lay out the city of Washington, D.C. It was the seat of our government. When they laid the seat out, the symbol of the compass was drawn into the grid of its streets. Now here we can see that the compass is shown in blue around the White House and the Capitol. Notice where the circle is. It encompasses the White House and the Capitol. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know whether they believe that they're going to control both of those government bodies, but it's just very strange that the Mason who laid out the city of Washington, as he was required to do by the Constitution, laid out the symbol of the compass and then put the White House and the Capitol building inside that circle. I think, as we've shown you, that a great percentage of our presidents have been members of the Masons. Certainly a great percentage of our congressmen and senators and Supreme Court justices have been as well. Let's continue our study of the symbols of the Masonic Lodge. Let's now go to the Great Seal of the United States. Here we see the front side, or what they call the obverse side. This is the front, showing the eagle and the other paraphernalia we're very familiar with. I want to flip the seal over and show you what they call the reverse side of the seal. This is the other side, the one we don't talk about very much. You'll see this seal on the back of your dollar bill. Congress authorized a seal on July the 4th, 1776, and they actually appointed 3 members of the Masonic Lodge, Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, to design the seal of the United States. These 3 Masons couldn't decide. So in 1782, couldn't decide what the symbols were going to be. So in 1782, William Barton, an authority on heraldry, submitted a design for especially the reverse side. Later, the Secretary of Congress, Charles Thompson, designed both sides, incorporating many of Barton's designs. Both were finally adopted on June the 20th, 1782. So this has been the seal of the United States for over 200 years. These seals conceal Masonic symbols. The first of which we're going to discuss is the number 13. 13 is a very symbolic number to the Masons. As I said, the Masons publish a magazine called The New Age. Now this is the April 1960 edition, and here it talks about, and this edition talks about the Masonic symbols on the $1 bill, on the seal, both sides of the seal. Let's go back now to the front side of the seal, and let's tell you what the Masons know about that seal and how it was designed. There are 13 leaves in the olive branch, 13 bars and stripes, 13 feathers in the tail, 13 arrows, 13 letters in the phrase E pluribus unum, 13 stars in the crest above, We could keep going, I'm sure there are others, but I think that's the beginning to show you that they've concealed the number 13 in the symbols. Other Masonic numbers, as I pointed out to you, are 32 and 33. There are 32 degrees inside the Scottish Rite and the 33rd, the honorary degree. So there are 32 long feathers on the eagle representing the 32 degrees in Masonry. By the way, the Masons themselves tell us this. And of course, there are 33 feathers rather, on each side of the wings, representing the 33 degrees of Masonry. Now let's go to the reverse side of the seal and examine the symbols concealed therein, the Masonic symbols. Notice these are the symbols told us by the Masons themselves. There are 13 granite stones, or layers rather, in the pyramid, 13 letters in Annuit Septus. By the way, briefly defined, that means God has prospered our undertakings, or words to that effect. It's been loosely translated various ways. By the way, we're going to examine who that God is on that seal a little later. But here at that point, it just says simply, God has prospered. We're going to examine the Masonic all-seeing eye, the eye above the pyramid, and we'll explain what that all-seeing eye and the phrase on the bottom, the Novos Ordo Seclorum, mean a few minutes later. Let's continue our discussion of some of these symbols about the American Revolution. This is a drawing of a very common flag used during the American Revolution. The phrase I want to call your attention to is "Don't tread on me." That phrase was seen all over the American Revolution during the early days of our founding. And the phrase number 27, "Don't tread on me," has 13 letters. Other phrases also have 13 letters. The phrase July the 4th has 13 letters. If you ever wondered why they picked that day instead of any other day, I believe it's because July the 4th has 13 letters in it. The words American Eagle also has 13 letters, and we're going to discuss why the eagle rather than the turkey was selected as our national bird in a few minutes. Cover some other interesting phenomena about the American Foundation, the founding of our nation, was the first United States Navy had 13 ships. It's interesting when you go back to the founding of the Illuminati that we've discussed a couple of programs ago, that Adam Weishaupt founded the Illuminati with 13 degrees inside the Illuminati. We also know that the Illuminati was diabolical, meaning it supported a belief in Lucifer, Satan, the devil. Now in this book, entitled The Cosmic Conspiracy, the author Stan Deyo talks about the number 13, and he makes a very interesting and very revealing comment. He says number 28. Stan Deyo says, 13 is the value assigned to represent Satan. Now let's see whether or not that is true. If it is true, then maybe it'll explain why all those symbols are in our dollar bill and what the number really means. Is it possible that our dollar bill conceals secret messages about Lucifer, Satan, the devil? Let's take a look and continue that thought and see whether or not we can prove it. Now this is a book written about the seal of the United States entitled Our Great Seal, written by E. Raymond Capt, his name is, and it says this on page 23, number 29. There is a deeply religious and supremely spiritual truth incorporated in the Great Seal. And he wrote that book all about Masonic, about the symbolism in that seal, but didn't tell us what it meant or what that secret was. I'm going to tell you what that secret is in a few moments, and I'm going to try to prove it from the Masons themselves. We'll see what that truth is in a few minutes. Perhaps you remember the discussion as to whether the turkey or the eagle should be the national bird of America. According to the book I just held up, Our Great Seal, number 30, the eagle is supposed to be, in heraldry, the only creature that can look directly into the sun. Now, why is it important that the eagle look into the sun? We'll see that in a minute. Our bird was selected because it had the ability, apparently, to look, at least according to some people, directly at the sun. I'm going to show you why that's important. We're going to connect the American eagle, the Great Seal, and sun worship in a few moments. Albert Pike the Mason said, number 31, the eagle, don't forget, this is the Mason saying, Albert Pike, the eagle was the living symbol of the Egyptian god Mendes, the representative of the sun. Please hold that thought. We'll discuss this symbol about the eagle again as the sun in a few minutes. Even though the Masons were still very young, there were some who had discovered their true nature and were warning others about the order. The Catholic Church was one of the first to object to the Masons from nearly its modern date of creation. The first warning came just 21 years after the founding of the Masons in 1717, number 32. The Roman Church officially condemned Freemasonry in the form of a bull issued by Pope Clement XII in 1738. Other Catholics have warned us about the Masons. In 1829, Pius VIII wrote, number 33, "Lying is their rule, Satan is their God." Number 34, Pope Gregory XVI in 1832 said this about the Masons, "Masonry is the principal cause of all calamities on earth." Number 35, Pius IX in 1846 said, "Masonry is a perverse sect out to ruin religious and civil society whose object is to blot out the Church of Christ." Number 36, well, that's before that. Let me show you. Leo XIII in 1884 was a pope, and he wrote that the Masonic lodges, number 36. The Masonic lodges form a powerful auxiliary of Satan. He charged the Masons with aiming at the overthrow of the whole religious, political, and social order based on Christian institutions and the establishment of a state of things based on pure naturalism. Naturalism is defined as the denial of the supernatural in religion. Please remember what Pope Leo XIII wrote. We'll explain what he meant in a few minutes. The next pope to speak out against the Masons was Pope Benedict XV, who in 1917 issued number 37, a code of canon law which banned Catholic membership in the Masonic order or in similar associations plotting against the church. So here he said the Masons are out plotting against the church. Now I must repeat, please understand that there are two types of Masons today. Those who are illuminated Masons, those who know the secrets of the Masonic Lodge, those who are both members of the Illuminati and the Masons, and there are those who are not. So please understand, your friends, your neighbors, your relatives who don't know about this are telling you the truth. They're being lied to by their own Masons, as we've tried to show you. In America's early history, the majority of the founding fathers were not, I repeat, not illuminated Masons, but some were. Hence the illuminated symbols on our dollar bill. We'll connect the Masons, the Illuminati, and our Great Seal in a few minutes. Now we'll see the struggle between the illuminated Masons and the regular Masons in our study of America's history for the next couple of weeks. Prior to the American Revolution, Freemasonry was the first to advise a federation of the colonies. In other words, some Masons were urging America to separate herself from England. And we're going to see what the reason was. It was not over taxation or anything else. We're going to see by their own writings what their purpose was to start the American Revolution. The Masons were able to meet in secret and plot the revolution without fear of discovery from the non-Masons, obviously. And that was the reason they were able to plot the American Revolution. One of the first events to trigger the revolution occurred on December the 16th, 1773. It's been called the Boston Tea Party, and it was the story about some people dressed up as Indians who dumped the tea into the bay. And I don't remember, in fact I was not taught when I was in school who those people were that dumped the tea into the harbor. We were told a bunch of people dressed up as Indians and decided to do that. But in truth, the Masons acknowledged that they were the ones that did the tea dumping. They were members of the St. John's Masonic Lodge of Boston. They actually were in meeting that night. They stopped the meeting, dressed up as the Indians, ran out into the harbor, dumped the tea overboard, and didn't want the American people to know who had done that. Amongst the Masons inside that activity were Paul Revere and John Hancock, both members of the Masonic Lodge. I believe the purpose of the Boston Tea Party was to inflame the other Masons and of course other Americans to action, and their fellow Masons did indeed get involved. The majority of the Continental Congress and 53 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of the Independence were members of the Masons. let me repeat that, 53 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were members of the Masonic Lodge. As I told you, we pointed out before, Manly P. Hall is the president, founder, or we've seen Manly P. Hall rather. We did not know, we didn't discuss this, but he's the president and founder of the Philosophical Research Society, Incorporated. In over 50 years of public activity, Manly P. Hall has delivered more than 7,000 lectures and has authored countless books, essays, and articles. In other words, he's a very busy man writing about secret fraternities, about the history of religions, and about philosophies, as we've seen. We've read a couple of his books already. Manly P. Hall is, as I said, a 33rd degree Mason. He wrote this little book entitled The Secret Destiny of America. Notice the title, The Secret Destiny of America. America has a secret destiny, according to Manly P. Hall. What is that secret destiny? We're going to find out because Manly P. Hall tells us. Now, I bet you didn't know that America had a secret destiny. But of course, if you knew, it wouldn't be a secret. So we're going to see just exactly what that secret is. What is the secret destiny of America? Number 38. Manly P. Hall says, quote, "Years of research has convinced me that there exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. Secret, I say, because this high purpose is not realized by the many." Mr. Hall continues, number 39. Ben Franklin spoke for the order of the quest, and most of the men who worked with him in the early days of the American Revolution were also members of the orders of the quest. Now that's interesting. Benjamin Franklin, he says, and he's the only one in that book that he mentions by name. Of all the people that might have been illuminated Masons, those who were members of both the Illuminati and the Masonic Order, the key is probably Ben Franklin. He's probably the closest, although there's no way to prove it because Franklin never told us. But if anybody was, Ben Franklin was a member of the Illuminated Masons. And here he says Ben Franklin worked for this order of the quest. He spoke for it. And we're going to see that Ben Franklin had a major involvement in the activities of the American Revolution. Manly P. Hall then writes about the seal of the United States, number 40. The Great Seal was directly inspired by these orders of the human quest, and it set forth the purpose for this nation. The purpose for this nation. What is the purpose for this nation? What is the secret destiny of America? Where is it concealed? We're going to find out. We can find out what our secret destiny is, number 41. Mr. Hall tells us, if this design on the obverse, meaning the front side of the seal, is stamped with the signature of the order of the quest, the design of the reverse is even more definitely related to the old mysteries. What is the secret of the quest found in the seal? I believe with Manly P. Hall that it is concealed in the phrase on the bottom of the seal, of the reverse side of the seal, the phrase, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. That, I believe, is the secret destiny of America. It is the goal of the order of the quest. The phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum means novos, Latin for new, ordo, the word order, seclorum, the word world, the new world order, thus Novus Ordo Seclorum. Now we are currently living under the old world order that supports the family, religion, nationalism, morality, and eternal truths. To create a Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new world order, all of the old world order must be destroyed. That is why the Illuminati wanted to destroy all ordered government, all private property, the family, all morality, and all religion. Weishaupt wanted to create a new world order, a Novus Ordo Seclorum on the wreckage of the old world order. Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism, also wanted a Novus Ordo Seclorum as well. He wrote the following 70 years after Weishaupt wrote that Weishaupt wanted to destroy the old world order. Karl Marx wrote number 42. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of man is a demand for their real happiness. The communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let me repeat that last sentence. The communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. If you overthrow all existing social conditions, you must replace them with some new social conditions. And those new social conditions are called the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the New World Order, America's secret destiny. And these new social conditions are the exact opposite of the old social conditions, the old world order of God. So according to Manly P. Hall, 33rd degree Mason, the secret destiny of America is to provide the world with the new world order, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. And the Novus Ordo Seclorum is the exact opposite of God's world order. And the way they are planning to achieve the new world order is through secret societies. Now that's a good place to break, because we'll start our study next week with an invitation, with the study of these secret societies as we continue our study of the Novus Ordo Seclorum. We're going to examine secret societies. We're going to look inside to see what they're up to see what their goals are, to see whether or not they're satanic, Luciferian, whether or not they've got our ends in tune with what, do we want what they're going to give us. So I invite you to tune in next week as we continue to explore the secrets of history. Thank you so very, very much.
Historian Ralph Epperson that wars, revolutions, and depressions are planned years in advance, and that those who have been involved in the planning of these events have been ensuring that their involvement has been removed from recorded history. It will be Ralph Epperson's purpose to discuss the major events of the past and to remove the veil that has been utilized to cover up the secrets of history.
Welcome to Secrets of History. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I'm the host of this series. Secrets of History is a 24-week lecture series which will explore the conspiratorial view of history. I've been studying the conspiratorial view of history and the historical view that holds that the major events have been caused intentionally. About 2 years ago, I published my book entitled The Unseen Hand. I've subtitled it An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. Tonight's session is number 11 in the series, and tonight we're going to continue our study of the Masonic Order and its influence in American affairs. We're also going to discuss the early American history, starting with the American Revolution. We'll probably get into the War of 1812, the election of Andrew Jackson, and more than likely the Civil War. So we're going to continue our study of the early American history to see how, in most of our instances, most of our cases where we've been lied to and how the truth has been distorted. On a previous program, we talked about the fact that about 1/3 of the United States is owned by the federal government, almost all without constitutional authority. And I said that I worried about what would happen should the government decide to sell this land to private owners. If the government sold all of this land at once, the price of land would sharply drop, and all of the state, county, and local governments that depend upon the property tax would be bankrupt. Apparently, the American government once considered selling their large holdings of this raw land. This is an article that appeared in our local newspaper on April the 17th, 1982, and as you can see, the headline reads, "Federal Land Sale Plan Alarms the West." But the sale never materialized and the local government survived. Last week we discussed the New World Order and how people are trying to replace the old world order with the new. And the New World Order is going to change the social conditions, to be the exact opposite of the old. And those new social conditions are called the New World Order. The old world order was of God. The New World Order is of Lucifer, Satan, the devil, as we'll see. According to 33rd degree Mason Manly P. Hall, the secret destiny of America is to provide the world with the New World Order, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. And the Novus Ordo Seclorum is the exact opposite of God's world order. And the way they are planning to achieve the New World Order is through secret societies. Author George Orwell, a member of a secret society, wrote a book entitled 1984. In his book, Orwell details how someone is initiated into a secret society that Orwell called the Brotherhood. I believe the following oath is similar to the one that these conspirators take to guide them in their quest for the New World Order. Remember, as we read this quote, that Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, wrote that the ends justify the means. An initiate into the Brotherhood is asked this question, number 43. Are you prepared to give your life, to commit murder, to commit acts of sabotage which may cause the death of hundreds of innocent people, to betray your country to foreign powers, to cheat, to forge, to blackmail, to corrupt the minds of children, to distribute habit-forming drugs, to encourage prostitution, to disseminate venereal diseases, to do anything which is likely to cause demoralization and weaken the power of the people? Are you prepared to commit suicide if and when we order you to do so? Please remember that last sentence about committing suicide. We will see an actual instance in history where an individual committed suicide when ordered to do so. Now, these people consider their goal, this quest, so important that they will commit any act that furthers their goal. Please remember this during the next 17 weeks. Now let's return to Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, number 44. Every Masonic lodge is a lodge of religion, is a temple of religion, and its teachings are instructions in religion. It is a worship. Now, according to this book, Captain Morgan's book, entitled Freemasonry Exposed, during initiation into the 3 degrees of the Blue Lodge, the initiate is asked, number 45, what do you most desire? And the initiate answers, light. Remember that, light. A little later in his book, Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike tells us who he believes has the light that the Mason is asking for. Number 46. Lucifer, the light bearer. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not. Here Pike identifies the light bearer, the object of their worship. It is Lucifer, also known as Satan the devil. After studying Freemasonry for about 6 years, I believe that this is the secret behind the secret. Some of the Masons know that the master of their lodge is Lucifer, Satan the devil. For those who say that Pike really didn't mean that Lucifer was the object of their worship, I'd like to read you a letter that Pike wrote on July the 14th, 1889. It completely clears up the mystery. Number 47. Albert Pike wrote, to the crowd, that means us, we must say, we the Masons must say to the crowd, we worship a God, but it is the God one adores without superstition. You may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. All of us initiates of the high degrees should maintain the Masonic religion in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians and his priests, falsely accuse and slander him? Yes, Lucifer is God. And unfortunately, notice the word unfortunately, Adonai is also God. Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. The true and pure philosophic religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. Adonai is the Old Testament name for God in the book of Genesis. Lucifer, the God of the illuminated Masons. Manly P. Hall is, as I've said before, a 33rd degree Mason. And he wrote this little book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry by Manly P. Hall, 33rd degree Mason. As I've said before, this book is recommended reading for all of the Masons. And Manly P. Hall wrote this, number 48. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, the hands of a Mason. And before he, the Mason, may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy. Now, Pike also wrote number 49 in the book Morals and Dogma. Our lodges are said to be due east and west because the master represents the rising sun. The sun, his, is the all-seeing eye in our lodges. Masons in the Masonic cathedral worship the sun. And notice, it's the Masons themselves that are saying that. Now, the sun brings light and life to mankind. According to the illuminated Masons, Satan brings light and life to man through reason, the mind that man is to use to decide for himself what is right and wrong. The sun is the symbol of Satan. Adolf Hitler, the head of the German Socialist Party, called the Nazi Party, during World War II, joined a secret society in 1923 called the Thule Society. The original members of the Nazi Party were drawn from this group. Number 50. It is in the Thule Society that one has to look for the real inspiration of Nazism. In the Nazi cosmology, the sun, and I want you to notice the sun in the Nazi cosmology played a prime role as a sacred symbol of the Aryans. Hitler saw in the Jewish people, with their black hair and swarthy complexion, the dark side of the human species, while the blonde and blue-eyed Aryans constituted the light side of humanity. Hitler undertook to extirpate from the material world its impure elements to lead it back to glory. The inner core within the Thule Society were all Satanists who practiced black magic. Adolf Hitler was a sun worshiper. Adolf Hitler was a Satan worshiper. The swastika is a religious symbol representing the sun. Now, this is called the leftward rotating swastika, which represents goodness. When you flip the swastika over, you get the right rotating swastika, which universally represents evil. Now, Hitler personally selected the right rotating swastika, even though it is known that he knew the difference between the two symbols. The symbol of the Nazi Party is a symbol of the sun, and the sun is a symbol of Satan. I'd like to show you some other Masonic symbols. Now, this is an obelisk. This particular one is the oldest known surviving needle or obelisk in Egypt. According to this book, entitled The Magic of Obelisks, this obelisk was constructed in 1942 in the city of Heliopolis. Heliopolis, Egypt, is described as being the greatest theological center in ancient Egypt. It was in Heliopolis where the temple to the sun was also located, with 13,000 sun-worshipping priests. The Masons tell us themselves also what the obelisk stands for. In this book, entitled Introduction to Freemasonry, I had to Xerox it, but there it is. It's presented by the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of the ancient free and accepted Masons of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This particular copy was printed or given to this man in 1941. According to that lodge, according to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, the Mason is told on page 78, number 51, from the dawn of religion, the pillar, meaning the obelisk, has played an important part in the worship of the unseen. In Egypt, the obelisk stood for the very presence of the sun god himself. Let me repeat that last sentence. In Egypt, the obelisk stood for the very presence of the sun god himself. So the obelisk represents the sun god himself. The sun is the symbol of Lucifer, Satan the devil. So the obelisk represents Lucifer, the sun god. Now there are two other obelisks in the world that I'd like to bring to your attention. The first is the Washington Monument, located in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. The Washington Monument is not a true obelisk because it was not constructed from a single piece of stone. Now this can better be illustrated from the drawing of this drawing of the monument. As you can see, the structure is composed of many layers of individual blocks of stone. The Washington Monument was constructed as a monument to George Washington, a most visible member of the Masonic Order. Now this is a picture of President Washington wearing the regalia as a member of the Masons, as he was laying the cornerstone of the Capitol building in 1793. A very strange thing occurred around the Washington Monument during the inauguration of President Ronald Reagan in January 1981. Every president of the United States prior to 1980 was sworn in on the east front of the Capitol building. But for some reason, Ronald Reagan was sworn in on the west front of the Capitol building. And when you're sworn in on the west, you face the Washington Monument. In fact, this picture that appeared in Time magazine on February the 2nd, 1981, shows the entire scene of the inauguration. That small figure at the bottom is President Ronald Reagan, shown by the green arrow. And the Washington Monument, obviously, is shown at the top. The caption under the picture in Time magazine reads number 52. Before some 150,000 listeners at the west front of the Capitol, Reagan gazes towards the Washington Monument and delivers his address. Now, why did Reagan face the Washington Monument? Newsweek magazine, in its coverage of the inauguration, does not say, but it does report that the change was made because the west side of the Capitol was not made because the west side of the Capitol was more attractive. Let me repeat that. But it does report that the change was not made because the west side of the Capitol was more attractive. In fact, Newsweek said, number 53, but the seldom used west front is crumbling, its rickety porticos held up by wooden posts. Rather than pop for a major repair job, however, the inaugural committee ordered a hasty coat of white paint and draped a gigantic American flag over the unsightly wooden beams. Perhaps a clue to the answer of the question, or to the question, as to why Reagan, quote, gazed at the Washington Monument, unquote, can be found in this book entitled The Brotherhood. And there it is, The Brotherhood, The Secret World of the Freemasons, written by Stephen Knight from England. Now, Stephen Knight wrote a first book about the Masons in which he discussed the fact that he concluded that Jack the Ripper was a member of the Masonic Order. It's interesting that I'm guessing now that Stephen Knight discovered that the Masons were very important because I believe they covered up the assassinations or the killings of Jack the Ripper. So he wrote this second book called The Brotherhood. On page 34 of this book, Mr. Knight says that Ronald Reagan is a member of the Masons. Now, I want to be honest with you. I've never read another source that has said President Reagan is a Mason. And as far as I know, President Reagan has never said that he was. But there are secret members of the Masons, at least according to this book, entitled Freemasonry, an Interpretation by Martin L. Wagner. Martin L. Wagner was a Christian minister, and I've heard that he was also a member of the Masons who got out and became a Christian minister, or at least wrote about it after he got out of the Masonic Order. Mr. Wagner says on pages 296 and 297, Number 54. The great architect of the universe is God in Freemasonry, and those who call the hidden, all-powerful principle working in nature God are acknowledged by the craft as Freemasons, whether or not they have been initiated into the institution. A Mason, then, is one who believes this life energy in nature is the true God, though he never may have been initiated into the order. Quote, there are many Masons who have never been initiated, unquote, says the Masonic spokesman. So I do not know whether or not President Reagan is a member of the Masonic order. But if Mr. Wagner is right, Reagan could be without telling us. And if Reagan was a secret Mason, he couldn't tell us, or he wouldn't be a secret Mason any longer. So I don't know. It is just an interesting fact of history. So no matter why Reagan was sworn in on the west front of the Capitol, he was scheduled to be sworn in again on the west front in his second inauguration in 1985. But cold weather required that the ceremony be held indoors. The second obelisk I want to bring to your attention is the one in St. Peter's Square in Rome, Italy. This obelisk is inside Vatican City, the home of the Pope of the Catholic Church. And whenever the Pope appears in the square to address the crowd below, he faces the obelisk in the center. Now this is a picture that appeared in Life magazine, and it shows Pope Pius XII addressing the people in St. Peter's Square. And in front of the Pope is the obelisk. Now this particular obelisk, the one in St. Peter's Square, is an original one, brought to Rome from Egypt in the 1st century by the Roman Emperor Caligula. So the sun god, Lucifer, resides in Washington, D.C., and in Rome, Italy, in the form of two obelisks. Another interesting symbol shows up in St. Peter's Square as well. In this picture, you can see the Bernini colonnade, consisting of what I count as 32 columns on each side. Now, I'm sure that it's a coincidence that there are 32 degrees in Masonry and 32 columns on each side of the Bernini colonnade. Other symbols conceal Masonic symbols as well. This is the symbol of the United Nations. I'm certain that it is a coincidence that the grid lines surrounding the globe have divided the world into 32 sections, 33 if you count the circle at the top. Also, there are 13 wheat grains on each side of the globe. And as we've seen, 13 is a secret number of the Masons. And of course, 32 and 33 are the number of degrees in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. I also believe, as we've talked last week or the week before, that 13 is the number of Satan. And I also believe that the United Nations is the future world government, the one that's yet to come. While we're talking about the symbol of the United Nations, I'd like to show you another interesting coincidence. This is the emblem of the Soviet Union. I'm certain it is a coincidence that it so closely resembles the symbol of the United Nations. Let me wrap this entire subject of the Masonic symbols up with the thought of another author. In this book entitled Two Babylons, the author, Alexander Hislop, let me turn it sideways, that's one way you can see the label, the title, The Two Babylons. The author, Alexander Hislop, discusses the connection between the sun as a symbol and Satan worship. The author writes, number 55, in the mythology of the primitive world, the serpent is universally the symbol of the sun. Let me repeat that. In the mythology of the primitive world, the serpent is universally the symbol of the sun. As the sun was the great enlightener of the physical world, so the serpent was held to have been the great enlightener of the spiritual world. He continued, the worship of the serpent began side by side with the worship of fire and the sun. Manly P. Hall is, as I said, a 33rd degree Mason. And he's written this, number 56. The master mason is in truth a sun, a great reflector of light. He stands between the glowing firelight and the world. Through him passes Hydra, the great snake. So through the master mason passes Hydra, the great snake. And I ask you, who is the great snake? It is Lucifer in the Old Testament. And from its mouth, the mouth of Hydra, the great snake, there pours to man the light of God. His symbol is the rising sun. Whose symbol is the rising sun? It is Hydra, the snake, and the snake represents Lucifer. But the worship of Lucifer is not something that was just discovered in the recent past. In this book, The Secret Teachings of the Ages, and we've held this book up before, The Secret Teachings of the Ages, the author, Manly P. Hall, once again, as I've said, a 33rd degree Mason, wrote about the worshiping of Lucifer by recognizing, number 56, the existence of a secret and all-important doctrine which from the time of the earliest civilizations has been concealed within the rituals, symbols, and allegories of religions and philosophies. The mysteries were secret societies binding their initiates to inviolable secrecy and avenging with death the betrayal of their sacred trusts. He furthermore states, 56c, in Masonry, the ancient religious and philosophic principles still survive. And Mr. Hall states further in his book that his book is dedicated, number 56d, to the proposition that concealed within the emblematic figures, allegories, and rituals of the ancients is a secret doctrine concerning the inner mysteries of life, which doctrine has been preserved among a small band of initiated minds since the beginning of the world. Now, what are those ancient religious and philosophic principles? Quite simply, and is amply documented, and as is amply documented in that book, Secret Teachings of the Ages, the truth is that every major religion of the past, except Christianity and Judaism, has worshipped Lucifer, Satan, the devil, and that fact has been concealed from the majority of the world. As one example of this fact, I'd like to show you this ancient Phoenician coin minted in the city of Tyre. This coin shows a serpent wrapped around a tree stump with an empty cornucopia to the left and a flourishing palm tree to the right. The snake represents the powerful Phoenician god whom the Romans called Aesculapius. The name Aesculapius means the man instructing snake. In mythology, Aesculapius was the child of the sun and thus the enlightener of man. The tree stump symbolizes the fallen angel being cut off as Satan was by being cast out of heaven. The serpent is exerting its supernatural powers on the dead stump to revive it. The cornucopia normally signifies abundance, but on this coin, note that it is empty. The palm tree is a symbol of victory. The cornucopia is empty until the final victory of Lucifer. So the coin depicts the fall of Lucifer and his ultimate victory here on earth. Now this is what the Bible says about sun worship, number 57. Deuteronomy 17, 2-5. If there be found among you any man or woman that hath gone and worshipped other gods, either the sun or moon, such is an abomination. And to show you that there were people actually worshiping the sun, let me refer you once again to the Old Testament. Ezekiel was a prophet of the Old Testament who wrote in the period between 593 and 571 BC. Ezekiel is taken by the Lord God in a vision to the temple in Jerusalem. There he is told that he shall see, quote, great abominations, unquote. What abominations did Ezekiel see? Ezekiel 8:16 says, "And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's temple." And then we'll continue number 58. "At the door of the temple were about 25 men with their backs towards the temple of the Lord, and their faces towards the east, and they worshiped the sun towards the east." Notice that the Bible says that sun worship is an abomination. Yet we see others, even today, worshiping the sun in the east. Now that we have an understanding of the order of the quest and who its God is, we can now return to our study of American history. Benjamin Franklin, one of America's founding fathers, was in London in the 1760s. And he was asked a question that's been recorded in a book that I read. This question was number 59. How do you account for the prosperity in the American colonies? Ben Franklin was asked that question, and this is Ben Franklin's recorded answer. That is simple. It is only because in the colonies we issue our own money. It is called colonial script, and we issue it in the proper proportions